So welcome everyone to the September Patch Tuesday webinar. And this is Chris Gettle, and joining me as always is Todd Schell. We do appreciate you guys. Many of you are longtime followers of the webinar series, so thank you as always for joining us again. For those of you who may be new to the platform, thank you for joining us as well. We do have a platform change this month, so I wanted to take just a couple minutes to start with to get you acquainted with the different layout. So the way that this works is a little bit different than the On24 platform we'd been using previously. There is a docs section. So within your experience, you should see chat, docs, and Q&A. Under docs, you're going to see a number of different documents in there, including today's presentation. So if you want to open that up and be able to follow through and even open up some of the links that I'm going to talk about and some of the news related items, go ahead and download that right now. Along with that, you're going to see a couple of other things in there. There's the recent State of Cybersecurity report that we have run, the 2024 edition from Ivanti is out. So you guys get access to that from here. So if you want to grab that, go ahead and grab that as well. That way you don't have to enter a separate form later on to get it if you want to take a look at it. So there's a couple of different reports in there that you can download. Take a look at those. I know two of them look like they're the same name, but they are actually different documents there. So there's a limit to how much space it actually lets you see from a name perspective there. But you can go ahead and download all those documents from here and have that content on hand. Again, the presentation is probably the main one you'll want for today. That's going to have the content that Todd and I are going to go through and all the links and everything if you want to grab those immediately. Between chat and Q&A, the Q&A is where we want you to do most of your questions there. We've got a team of people who are going to be kind of triaging and answering many of the questions. So if there's logistics questions, we've got people looking at that. If there's technical questions, we've got a couple of people watching those as well, and they're going to be flagging the ones that Todd and I will answer live for the majority of you as well. So do post your questions in the Q&A section, and that will help me and Todd to answer those as quickly and easily as possible. All right, I think with that, we're good to go, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So kicking off, we're going to start with just kind of a high level what's going on in the news. So some general kind of overview of some of the trends and news articles that we're seeing there. Then Todd is going to walk us through the bulletins and releases for this month, and we'll wrap up with the Between the Patch Tuesday section. So as many of you know, most of the software we're dealing with now is on a continuous release cycle. Very few vendors do a predictable kind of release cadence like Microsoft has their Patch Tuesday. We've got Adobe, Oracle. Those are a handful of vendors who are on a more predictable release cadence for their applications. The majority of vendors are releasing on a more of a continuous release cycle. So vendors like Apple, you'll see updates from them every three to 5 weeks, but it's not going to be on a this week of this month, or it's just going to be as soon as they're ready, they release. Google Chrome, as of August last year, many of you know that they've been on a continuous release cycle where every week they're releasing a security update. So there, Chrome and Edge, you're going to have browser updates for those two products every week. Firefox has some months where they only have a single release and other months where they have 3 to 4 releases. So on any given month, we may have to release, or any given week, we may have to release all 3 of the browser updates to resolve security vulnerabilities in the browsers across our environments. So the Between the Patch Tuesday section is really trying to give you that perspective of what are all the other things that came out since the last Patch Tuesday that you may need to be aware of. And there's a lot of security vulnerabilities that come out in those releases. So we will go through that, and then we will wrap up with some additional Q&A at the end here. All right, so Adobe and Microsoft were the main vendors releasing yesterday. Chrome did release as well later in the day. It was a bit later in the day, so we had already gotten our content out before they had released theirs, but there were 4 CVEs resolved in the Chrome update from the details that I've seen so far this morning. So that update is out, and there will be an Edge update here shortly as well, if not already, depending on how quickly Microsoft turned that around. So that is something to look for there as well. We do have Chrome and Edge updates this week, of course. Starting off with a little bit of news. Now, here's where I'm going to jump between slides and screen share. It is going to be more of a, I'm going to stop showing slides and I'm going to start sharing my screen here in a moment. So as we do that, go ahead and follow along with what I'm doing on my screen. If you want to continue to look at the slides, I'm not going to be advancing them while we're going through this, but you can see the links I'm doing, I'm going to go through in order. So we've got 4 news links that we're going to cover, and then we've got links to the specific 0 days and disclosures that are going on that we'll be covering specifically there. So our first news article, this is definitely a hot topic right now. AI in general is raising a lot of questions and concerns within organizations. So I had the privilege of doing a guest lecture last week for a university in Tennessee, and for basically a guest lecture on risk management and assessing kind of risks in environments. But one of the questions that came up was around AI, and we talked a little bit about that in that session. So I thought it was between that and a number of questions I've had recently from customers and seeing a lot of articles going around. Yes, we're all still dealing with the rapid expansion and acceleration of this. So I think this was a good article to try to help people understand, what's going on in your environments. It talks about some of the security and privacy concerns, but it also talks about some of the behavior. If you're not familiar with, if you're not looking at the active day-to-day usage within your environment, your AI power users could be using AI technologies in as many as 12 or more applications that they use on a daily basis. So this article I thought was a really good one that just kind of talks about the general trends that we've been seeing. The fact that Gen AI users really are going all in very quickly. Many of them are using 8 or more applications every month, using generative AI functionality in multiple applications each month. One of the concerns with that is many of these applications, so they actually looked at over 5,000 applications that had Gen AI enabled tools in them, and many of those are claiming to use content from their customers to train their models. So that is where we start to cross over into that security and privacy concern. So when you look at this, get an idea of what the trends are. The fact that 30% of the vendors that they looked at in over, again, 5,000 applications, 30% of those declare that they're training on customers' data. The data your users are putting into these applications could be being consumed by those models, and that's where we enter into those security and privacy concerns. So this is something where these trends, the data around this, may start to influence and help you to drive visibility around this. If you're having a challenge with trying to get security and privacy concerns understood and get clear policies in place around generative AI, this article may help you with giving you the right ammo for that. It also gives some good best practices. I think most of these are pretty self-explanatory, but making sure you're doing regular audits, that you've got clear policies defined, that you're doing user training around this, and where possible, letting your users opt out of the technologies that are being used. So that's an article I thought was very relevant to a lot of what people are struggling with right now. We're going to talk about this a little bit more here in a little bit, but Ivanti did release 3 product updates this Patch Tuesday as well that included security vulnerabilities. So I do want to go into a couple of those specific updates because there's some nuances there that you'll want to be aware of. Many of you probably already have these implemented in a way where much of the risk is already mitigated. If you haven't looked at those best practices, I just wanted to call those out and make sure that you get that guidance there, because there's a couple of these that if you've implemented the product in a bad way or an unsafe way, you could be a lot more exposed. again, it's just trying to make sure you've got the right guidance. There's also some end of lives around here that I wanted to reemphasize and make sure that you're pushing forward to the new technologies in certain areas to reduce the vulnerability concerns as well. So we'll talk about these more, but there were a couple of articles that went out around these vulnerabilities. We're definitely going to talk about the 3 releases there in just a few minutes. Ransomware, of course, continuing to be kind of a thorn in everyone's side. There was a Forbes article here that kind of went into a really good level of detail of the kind of continued threat of ransomware, what organizations are still dealing with. There's a number of different verticals, especially that are very heavily under attack. The public education system, healthcare, a couple of areas where they're really focused on targeting those areas today, because you're seeing a lot of additional pressure to potentially pay just to get back up and running. So there's several school districts recently that have been hit in the US, a number of healthcare organizations. So definitely some concerns there. So this was, I think, a good article that talks about what are the latest trends that are being seen, the specific areas being targeted most, and again, some of those fundamental things that you need to make sure you've got in place to try to mitigate the impacts of ransomware attacks that are going on still. And of course, we've got the geopolitical concerns. There's a lot of Russian activities going on. German intelligence especially has been identifying some of the attacks that have been going on for the EU and NATO, and attributing those back to Russian-based threat actors, and really kind of talking about what are the things that are going on right now. So if you have if your organization is tied in any way to areas where those conflicts are going on right now, this may be some trends that you want to just read up on and make sure you understand. But it's talking about some of the recent behaviors on that. This was just one article on it. You can easily go and look at most of the cybersecurity news outlets right now. Almost all of them had some level of article covering the NATO and EU targeted attacks that are going on right now. All right, so that's kind of the news lineup. The next, I'm going to switch over into the next slides are going to be going into the 0-day vulnerabilities that were identified in Microsoft's release. So we had 4 0 days that we're going to be covering. I'm not going to switch back to the slides, but if you did download the presentation, you can see now that we're moving on to slide 6, and we'll continue to move on through there. Each of these are covered in one of those, but I'm just going to cover the KB article link. And you can follow along with the slide there with some of those additional details. It's kind of the summary level of what we'll drill into. So the first vulnerability, CVE 2024-38217. This is the Windows Mark of the Web security feature bypass. So in this case, the attacker is able to bypass features like the smart screen application reputation by crafting a file to specifically use this vulnerability. So they can you basically have content that comes from a zone like the internet and allows the user to open it without the level of protection that's normally in place. The severity was rated as important by Microsoft. It actually has a very low CVSS score, but again, for those of you who have been on here pretty regularly, you know that we constantly talk about the fact that vendor severity and CVSS score completely go out the window once we have confirmed real-world attacks. Threat actors aren't deterred by complexity or other limitations. They may take a vulnerability like this, which may be a little bit harder to execute, and they're going to chain it together with multiple vulnerabilities to achieve their goals. So in a lot of these cases, this vulnerability alone may not be exploited very easily, but with 2 or 3 other CVEs, it becomes a very deadly attack. So there, again, this one has also been publicly exposed, not just exploited, but that public disclosure means that samples of this are available publicly. So not just like one threat actor group is using this and it's got a minimal kind of expansion. This one's available as a off the shelf. I can go find code samples potentially and details about it, and many different threat actors could be replicating this type of attack. So bumps the concern around this one even further to make sure that we want to get this resolved in a timely fashion. For what platforms are affected perspective, this is a Windows vulnerability. It is affecting everything all the way back to Server 2008. So pretty much all of the Windows editions, whether you're on ESU support for 2008 or 2012, or up to any of the currently supported Windows 10 and 11 versions or their corresponding server branches. This is across all of the Windows OSs this time around. This vulnerability is able to be exploited by social engineering methods. So an attacker will create a file. They could host it on a attacker-controlled server, convince the targeted user to download that. I think we all know by now that phishing is not a really a tough barrier. It's more of a statistical challenge. How many people do I have to send this to before I get somebody to click on it? So definitely not a barrier to threat actors being able to get somebody to do this. Another thing to keep in mind, I know a lot of you are actively investigating Windows 11 24H2. Yes, several of these vulnerabilities also affect those Windows Edition, the latest Windows Edition. So as you're starting to roll that out in preview, just know that these vulnerabilities do affect that as well. I know only certain form factors or certain systems are shipping with the new Windows 11 branch right now, but we'll probably see this become more mainstream here shortly. Todd, they're not out of preview yet from a general perspective. It's still kind of more of an early access, right?
Correct.
Okay. I hadn't seen a formal kind of it's out there for everybody yet, but we've got to be getting pretty close. All right, so that's the first vulnerability. The second one is a Windows installer elevation of privilege vulnerability. Again, rated important. In this case, the CVSS score is 7.8, but the fact that it's actively being exploited already, again, set those aside, treat this like a higher priority. Active exploitation's been detected. This is something that a threat actor could use against you today. The exploit in this case could allow the attacker to gain full system privileges and really be able to dig in on a system. So definitely, if they exploit this, it's a fairly dangerous one. And applicability standpoint, it does affect all of the Windows OS versions currently under release, including the soon-to-be available 24H2. So all your Windows editions need this update. Good news is there. Both of these are in the OS update this month. So one update, we resolved 2 of the 0 days right there. The third one is in Microsoft Publisher, another security feature bypass. In this case, this vulnerability allows the attacker to send a specially crafted file that allows them to bypass the macro policies. So if those policies are in effect, they would be able to block untrusted macros or malicious files from being able to be used through that. In this case, the attacker can craft that file in a specialized way to bypass those policies and be able to execute a macro or a file through the macro feature without going through those policies correctly. And good news is preview pane is not an attack vector in this case, but I can convince a user to open a file that I've sent to them and again, get the ability to bypass that and execute something very quickly on their system. Editions that this affects, it is Microsoft Publisher 2016 and then Office 2021 and Office 2019. Funny enough, I had a writer from one of the security outlets, Tech Target, was chatting with me yesterday about this one, and he's like, is anybody still using Publisher? I think I may have used it last in like 2005, and we laughed about that a little bit. But in many of these cases, your Office suite is bundled with this. If they convince a user to click on a file, that user is probably not paying attention to what type of file it is in most cases. And the fact that that's on your system could still be used against a user in that case. So definitely a concern unless you're explicitly removing Publisher from your Office suite installs. The last vulnerability that's being targeted right now is a little bit of an odd one. So this one is a vulnerability in Windows Update, which could allow remote code execution. It's classified as actively being targeted, but as you read through the details, it's not the CVE 2024-43491 that's actively being exploited. This vulnerability is resolving a regression where some servicing stack updates were reverted back, exposing some older vulnerabilities that were actively being targeted. So it's a little bit odd as you read in through the details, but to the best of my understanding, the vulnerability is rated as critical. CVSS score is a 9.8. In this case, it basically, you need to deploy not just the September security update, but also the latest servicing stack update, because it's a vulnerability in Windows that also triggered this revision in the servicing stack update for this platform. The good news on this one is it's only affecting Windows 10 version 1507 and the Windows 10 Enterprise 2015 LTSB branches for Windows 10 Enterprise and Windows 10 IoT. So you shouldn't be using Windows 10 version 1507 anymore because it's been end of life. That branch has been end of life for a while. If you're using the Windows 10 Enterprise 2015 LTSB or the Windows 10 IoT 2015 LTSB, those of you who are using that, this is where you need to worry about this update. For this, though, make sure you're doing both the security stack update and the Windows security update from this month to fully resolve this. So a little bit of nuance to that one. It shouldn't affect most of you unless you're using those the LTSB from 2015. Identify if you've got any of those. And if you do, this is definitely an article you'll want to take a look at and make sure you're getting everything right. But it's for most of you, it shouldn't be something in your environments anymore. We had somebody just saying they used Publisher just yesterday. Nice. Go ahead.
Hey, Chris, let me inject something here real quick. So this is kind of interesting because if you think about this, you're basically rolling back to a previous version of the operating system that was vulnerable. This is not Windows down date, by the way, but we did just get a question about Windows down date in the Q&A session, so I kind of want to add a few comments here. If we talked about it briefly last month. Chris talked about the in the news piece about Windows down date. This was a technique that was demonstrated at Black Hat this year, whereby using two CVEs, and these are 38202 and 21302, the attacker was able to roll back the operating system to a previous version and expose all the vulnerabilities that were available back then. So if you go back a year, you're literally exposing a couple hundred vulnerabilities that you can then exploit. Well, in the August update, Microsoft addressed one of them, 21302. But 38202 is still not addressed. So that particular vulnerability is still open. That was the question in the Q&A. Is down date still viable? The answer is yes. If you haven't patched your systems, it is still a viable attack. We're seeing more information in the news about that. One of the vulnerabilities is fixed, but Microsoft has not fixed the second one this month. So keep an eye on that one. Again, that's CVE 2024-38202. And I'll answer here in the Q&A session. That's it, Chris.
Perfect. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for catching those questions in there.
Yep.
So for those of you keeping up in the downloaded version of the presentation, we're about to go over to slide 9 for the next 3 links. So that's where you want to be now, up to slide 9. If you're still looking for that, there is a docs section. So where you see Q&A, there should also be a docs section there. Look under that docs section and you'll see today's presentation in there to download if you want to follow along with the links in here. So the next 3 links are the Ivanti products that were just recently updated. The first one is for Ivanti Endpoint Manager. We just released security updates for the 2024 version and for 2022. There were 16 vulnerabilities resolved. These were reported to Ivanti through private disclosure from the zero-day initiative. So we've got a good relationship with the ZDI team. In fact, they've been quoted in saying that we have a good working relationship. We respond well to the issues that they're bringing up to us, and that's one thing that I want to make sure to stress is very important. We always keep up with researchers who are identifying vulnerabilities and making sure to resolve those as quickly as possible. So the update is resolving 16 vulnerabilities. The highest of those is a CVEs score of 10. So there's a number of criticals in there altogether, several SQL injection vulnerabilities and things there as well. Depending on your configuration, many of these are mitigated unless you've got a fairly vanilla kind of SQL configuration. But there's still some concern with those, so we definitely wanted to get those addressed. So you can go and download the update. You can make sure to get the latest updates for either the 2022 or the 2024 branch of the product. So you can see here for EPM 2024 and then for EPM 2022. So make sure to start investigating and get your core updated as soon as you can and get those issues resolved. I do want to stress we are not aware of any customers being exploited by any of these vulnerabilities at the time of disclosure. And at the time so far we have not had any reports of that still 24 hours later. So this is proactive, making sure that we get these issues resolved. The second one is also for the EPM customers, but for those of you who are running the cloud service appliance. So many of you who have been using this, you know that the CSA version 4.6 has an announced end of life. This is the last security update we had planned for version 4.6. You should be moving to 5.0, which switches over from the appliance-based to the application-based instance of the CSA. This is a pretty significant architectural changeover. We're moving away from the appliance because that is, it prevents you from layering on all of the different security tools and other things within your environment as effectively. By putting this into an application architecture instead, you get to deploy this to a Linux system of your choosing, and you get to layer on the additional capabilities throughout your environment that you'd be doing across any other system. So your EDR solution, any other types of lockdown or detection or other things that you may have there. So moving from 4.6 to 5.0 gives you a lot of additional flexibility in being able to make sure all your tools can be applied to that, the way that your policies are set. So that's a critical point right there alone. We recommend rather than just looking to update 4.6 to the latest, you switch over to the CSA 5.0. 5.0 is not vulnerable to this vulnerability. So that's another clear thing to make sure we distinguish here is this is not a vulnerability in 5.0, only in 4.6. Again, we're not aware of any customers being exploited by this vulnerability at this time. And another thing that you'll see in more detail is we have some best practices here for how to implement the CSA. This is a perimeter application. So this is how you're basically allowing your off-network users to be able to communicate and do things like RDP sessions, make sure they're getting access to configuration changes, policy updates, all sorts of things like that. This is that gateway that allows that communication. If you've implemented this according to the best practices in our documentation, there is a management console that basically when you implement this, the guidance is to dual home this machine. Public facing side is just the interfaces that agents need to talk to when off network. Internally, you would want to put the management console interface on the internal network side so it's not exposed. This vulnerability becomes a bigger risk if you have not done that type of architecture as you rolled this out. So looking down here to number 4 in there, what else can you do to prevent the exploitation of this vulnerability? You want to make sure your CSA is configured with that dual home configuration with the ETH-0 on the internal network side. So most of you have probably done that. If you're uncertain, I would just check with that, make sure you're configured correctly, and that does help mitigate any types of risks. But upgrading to CSA 5.0, that's our best guidance. Like this is the way to go because you get the the ability to be more aggressive about how you're locking down this device, especially because of how it is on the internet-facing side. So if you have any more questions there, do reach out to us and make sure that especially on the architecture change or the migration, do reach out and we'll help you get to that new architecture as quickly as possible. All right, the last one is for those of you who might be using our Ivanti workspace control. There were 6 vulnerabilities resolved, and they were all rated as high. And in this case, there was the biggest change here is the fixes required a pretty significant architectural change. So any of you who are on this product, you know that there is an end of life that's been announced for this product as well. And that is out to December 31st of 2026. So there's a little bit of runway there yet. This change, though, to resolve these security vulnerabilities, the update here is going to do a pretty significant architectural change in this product. We're urging customers to consider looking at the migration path to we have a product designated as the kind of replacement for this go forward that's still supported beyond the 26th date. And our guidance here is definitely take a look at that. You're going to be going through an architectural change either way here. Because of the nature of these vulnerabilities, it just required that we had to make some pretty significant changes in the product. So do consider the migration path, and that will get you over to the product that will be continuing forward. So those are the 3 updates from the Ivanti side. I just wanted to make sure to stress a couple of those nuances there. The CSA, check your architecture, check your version. If you're not already on 5.0, we're strongly urging people to move over. And for the workspace control side, know that there's a architectural change coming in this update. So this may be a good time to evaluate that transition or the migration path to move over to the go forward product. So jumping in at slide 10, for those of you following at home, we have a partnership with a vendor called Tux Care. Tux Care is a Linux-specific patch management vendor. They do some pretty cool things like what's referred to as live patching. They're able to update specific parts of the Linux system without requiring a reboot. This is especially important for things like the kernel. So they can actually do a kernel update without the need for a reboot. So we've got a few customers who are in extreme high availability situations with some of their Linux environments in the gaming community and other places like media type services and things where you have certain systems that need to be up and running almost continuously, no downtime really allowed. This may be an ideal solution for keeping certain critical components of those platforms up to date without the need for additional downtime or reboots. So that's the partnership that we have with them, but you'll see that highlighted by Tux Care. Every month, Todd and I have a conversation with these guys, and they send over kind of some of the more recent top of news things in the Linux world. If you're less familiar with the Linux world, there's typically a longer tail of vulnerabilities being identified and them being remediated across all the different platforms that are out there. And it's because of the open source nature of Linux. There isn't one vendor who has control over this. In cases like Oracle, Red Hat and Oracle Linux are going to be updating a little bit more quickly and aggressively than some of the projects that are more straight up open source and community contributed. So they tend to give us a little bit of the high level, what are the things to be looking out for. The first of those this month is CVE 2024-39480. It affects Ubuntu 16.04 and 18.04. So it's a buffer flow overflow vulnerability. And let's see here, when the user attempts to symbol compilation with the tab key, the KDB will use this library to insert completed symbols into the command buffer. So it passes the size of the source buffer rather than the destination over, and that buffer is able to be, basically they're able to force an overflow. In this case, there's mitigation options there. The first one is trying to replace those particular commands or libraries within those systems. That may be something that needs a little bit more knowledge and sophistication to do that approach. Preferably do the option to update the kernel to the latest version available to remediate that vulnerability. So there is a mitigation option, but it's probably one where unless you have somebody savvy enough to do that level of replacement, recommendation here is to do the kernel update. The next vulnerability is CVE 2024-42154. This one affects all Linux, enterprise Linux distributions. The kernel network stack, there's a length check missing under TCP metrics, and that could allow an attacker to, I believe this one is code execution, isn't it? It doesn't say specifically here, but again, this vulnerability is a 9.8 CVSS score, definitely a critical, and also the kernel update is your path to reduce or mitigating this vulnerability. So update your Linux kernel to the latest. Todd?
Usually the buffer overflows are related to code execution, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty sure of that as well, but I noticed they didn't actually put that specifically in here. So
right.
Yeah. All right, our third CVE this month on the Linux side is CVE 2024-38428, another high CVSS score, so a 9.1 in this case, also affects all Linux distributions, versions of wget. So up to wget version 1.24.5. So the resolution here is to patch wget up to 1.24.5 or later, and a higher version than 1.24.5. So something later than that version, 1.24.5 and earlier are affected. The vulnerability in winget mishandles colons in the user info portion of the URI and could mistakenly use it as a host component instead. So it seems like a type confusion vulnerability there. This can lead to scenarios where specific firewall rules are bypassed and access to otherwise blocked resources could be possible. DNS queries could be sent to incorrect and potentially malicious domains. So you can see here, this starts to offer a lot of opportunities for threat actors to do different things. So a pretty nasty one in particular. So definitely one that you'll want to, again, get that version of winget to a version higher than wget up to 1.24, later than 1.24.5. I don't like the way that was worded. Usually it's a this or higher instead of up to this. So, all right, that is our Linux lineup for this month. There were some servicing stack updates this month. So Server 2012, 2012 R2, Windows 10, and the Windows 10 version 1607 2016 server branch as well.
It seems to be consistent, Chris, over the last 3 to 4 months. They're just updating those particular 4.
Yeah, and it has been pretty consistent. We've seen an update in the last several months here. So,
yep.
All right. End of lives, we do have next month. We've got 22H2 for Windows 11 Home and Pro, and 21H2 for the enterprise and education side. Those Windows 10 or Windows 11 branches, will be coming up on their end of life. Speaking of end of life, yeah, I know.
It's hard to believe the first of the Windows 11 are coming to an end.
Yes, we're into Windows 11. You remember way back when Microsoft said Windows 10, this is the last Windows you'll ever get, because it's going to be, yeah. But here we are, Windows 11. Never say it's going to be the last one, because that'll come back to haunt you. Another topic that has been coming up a lot for Todd and I this week is definitely one around Windows 10 extended support. So Windows 10, end of life for all Windows 10 editions is coming up next year on 2025 in October will be the last security update. You can see that above. So 22H2 will be coming up on its final end of life there. There's already companies that are looking at how to extend that life out past the end date by, I've seen all the way out to 3 years already. People already investigating saying, nope, we need this for that long. Many of those cases, it's the hardware. I've got hardware I've got to keep running for 2 to 3 more years past that end date, and they're already gearing up budgets and project-wise to be able to continue to do that ESU support. So definitely take a look at that if you haven't already, and make sure that you're prepared to go. So, wow, we are running long here today. I've been long-winded apparently. Todd, over to you.
You're doing great, Chris. Thanks. As Chris mentioned, on the third-party side, we did see Adobe Acrobat and Reader updated again this month. There were 2 particular vulnerabilities, both of those rated as critical. So if you're using that particular product, which I think most of us are these days, make sure that you do get that update into your regular monthly updates. Windows 11, we did have updates for all the regular versions, of course, here. You'll note that I do have a list for 24H2 on here. Keep in mind that it's just really released for the Copilot devices. Right now, we're anticipating a release here probably in October for the general populace as far as 24H2 goes. 31 vulnerabilities, again, as I said this month. Chris covered these in quite a bit of detail. The first one there, 38.217, is publicly disclosed and known exploited, as he said. The other ones are just known exploited. There were a couple of issues reported this month. We've been carrying this profile picture one forward here for like 4 or 5 months now. I think you're mostly, if you're a regular on the call, you're familiar with that. What's new this month, and you'll see this across almost all of the Windows 11 and Windows 10 updates, is that if you're running your system in a dual boot mode between Linux and Windows, there was an issue introduced this month. It was related to the secure boot active targeting value that gets passed over, and it will block and prevent you from booting into your Linux partition. So be aware of this one. It does show up in multiple places here. You'll see that 22H2 and 23H2, all editions, have this particular issue, as well as the new, well, this is a different issue. If you are first perhaps running 24H2 on top of the Copilot Plus devices, there is an issue with this particular application, Roblox, if you're running that. So you have to get it directly from the vendor and not from the Microsoft Store. On the Windows 10 side, we did see 45 vulnerabilities addressed. One additional one of the known exploited vulnerabilities is included here in Windows 10. So again, a normal set of updates here with 45 vulnerabilities this month. You'll see this dual boot issue showing up across all the different versions of Windows 10. And I should note that for those of you who were delving into the release notes that Microsoft released yesterday, you'll see some weird stuff in there. If you click, there's like multiple links that say 24H2, Windows 11 24H2, and one of them links to Windows Server 2022 for Windows 10. One of them links to the LTSC 2019. So there's some messed up links in their release notes right now. I did clean them up, and these are the proper links to the proper KBs that talk about these particular issues. But if you do go into their, their security updates page, you'll see that the release note links are a little messed up. We did see an update this month for Sharepoint Server. There were 5 vulnerabilities addressed across all 3 of their supported versions. Normally, you don't see any issues reported on Sharepoint Server, but this patch is critical this month. And there are some issues that they talk about in here. One of them has to do with the deserialization of custom data types. And the other one has to do with some unauthorized type are being blocked. So if you are updating Sharepoint Server this month with these updates, take a look at these KB articles, because they go into some detail on some workarounds that you can take a look at there. And they say that they are working on an issue to working on these issues to get them fixed in a future update. But be aware that there are some issues with Sharepoint Server updates this month, which we usually don't see. We had a release for SQL Server. Their general distribution updates, as well as their current cumulative updates, were released for each one of the supported versions that they have. There were 13 vulnerabilities addressed across all of these, none of which were exploited or publicly disclosed. There are like a kind of a wide range of vulnerabilities that they addressed this month. So if you're interested, go ahead and dig into those KB articles and take a look. Otherwise, just do your normal updates here. These are rated important this month because of known exploited or publicly disclosed. We did see some Office updates. Chris talked about Publisher in a little bit of detail earlier. You'll see that it is Publisher 2016 there. One thing of note this month, and I'll talk about it here on the next slide with regards to the Microsoft Office 365 apps, there were updates to Publisher for Office 2019 and Office LTSC 2021. But what's kind of interesting is I didn't actually see a Publisher update on O365, which was kind of interesting there. So I don't know if that was a misprint on Microsoft's part or whether it actually does not have an issue with that particular version. I don't know. But again, it has to do with this particular CVE 38226, which is known exploited in Publisher. So kind of be aware of that one. I would just run your regular updates anyway to make sure that you have everything covered. As Chris mentioned, we do keep track of what's happening between the Patch Tuesdays as we release updates ourselves for all of our products. Tracking security updates with CVEs. You can see I'll have a list of those here on the next couple of slides. There also are regular updates to a lot of applications where the manufacturer will tell you that it's a security update, but they don't necessarily quote CVEs that they've specifically addressed. So we have a whole host of updates that came out. Incidentally, the number in parentheses behind all these are the number of updates that were released during the month between this Patch Tuesday and last Patch Tuesday. We had a number of non-security updates as well for a lot of applications, so you want to keep up there getting your latest feature enhancements as well as performance fixes, of course. Going into detail, there was an update for Adobe Acrobat and Reader in the middle of the month. We did see the final update from the Java stuff from Eclipse Adoptium 8. Sometimes these take a little while to get out from the vendors. We had an Opera update. 3 Chrome updates. As Chris said, Chrome is on a much faster track than a lot of applications. They're basically releasing on a weekly basis these days. So you'll see each one of those coming out, addressing, in some cases, some 0-day updates. I think we're up to over 10 now, 0 days that have been reported in Google Chrome alone. We did see updates for Firefox throughout the month and Firefox ESR as well, addressing a number of vulnerabilities there. So if you're using those browsers, make sure you continue to update them on a regular basis. We did see a Python update as well. Plex Media Server, PyCharm Professional, and some Wireshark updates. So if you use those tools or those media servers, make sure that you have those up to date as well. On the Apple side, we didn't see any OS updates this month, but we did see quite a few product updates. Again, security, non-security. We did see, of course, the version of Adobe Acrobat for Mac OS. We saw the same browser updates, Firefox, Firefox ESR, the same set of Chrome updates as well for running on Mac OS. Some slight difference in some of the vulnerabilities in some cases, but for the most part, they're addressing kind of the common vulnerabilities they have in their code base. We did see a major update for Edge on the Mac platform this month with 24 vulnerabilities addressed. That one came back on August 23rd. And we did see a CMonkey update addressing 8 vulnerabilities. And it looks like I do not have all 8 vulnerabilities listed there. So I have to take a look at that particular issue. So that kind of gets through between the Patch Tuesday. Chris, how are we doing on our Q&A session? I know I was answering quite a few while you were talking.
Yeah, we're looking pretty good right now. I think, yeah, there was a question around, some specifics around the EPM upgrades. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, oh, what features and changes are also in there as well. Grab the link to that advisory page. It's going to also have links into where to download and everything else as well. If you do have additional questions about what changes are occurring and you aren't finding the details that you need, reach out to us. We weren't going to cover that in more detail today, but that's what I would suggest there. Let's see.
Looks like there were some questions around the end of life that we talked about on Windows 11 next month. Yeah, so this was the Home and Pro editions for those particular releases. Enterprise and Education are still being supported.
Correct.
So keep that in mind as well. So yeah, those have a longer lifespan than the Home and Pro versions.
And just one more point of clarification. The month of the end of life is the last security update. So next month, the October update, you're going to get one more security update, and then it'll be end of life. So, yeah. So after next Patch Tuesday, the October Patch Tuesday, that edition will no longer be getting updates. I think that's all of the major questions that I was seeing there. There were a couple of clarifications around naming. So specifically the Ivanti Endpoint Manager. This is I'm going to use legacy brands here for a second. Branding police, don't get mad. Landesk, the Landesk Management Suite is the product that we were talking about here. I know some of you might be using like the Mobile Iron EPMM product. That's the MDM solution there. That's not affected by the update that we just did. It was specifically that Ivanti Endpoint Manager, the Landesk legacy branding, that solution. So just wanted to clarify that there because there were a couple of questions about exactly which product what were we talking about there. There was one question about an issue that somebody ran into about doing the version 5 CSA on Red Hat 9X. So there, I would suggest getting a case open. Definitely, Red Hat was one of the operating systems we expected users to be installing that on. So definitely one that it should work on. So there's probably just something we have to work through from either a prereq perspective or a config perspective. The support team should be able to help get you resolved there. I think, we got it. Let's see, where are we on Adobe Creative Cloud patching through Ivanti? Todd, I think you've got some good news there.
Yes, we're getting very close on that one. We've actually been in communication with them, talking about some of the patching, and we've done some tweaks into our detection, the ability to detect. We're looking at doing the suite first of all, and then looking to do the individual apps soon. So I would say, talking with our content team, they're looking to have something out in the next month or two. So hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel here on this one.
All right, I think that wraps up the questions that we had open there. So thank you, everyone. I know we're new platform, so this month there was a little bit of a learning curve there. Thank you for working with us here to get through a few of the kinks as we've been doing that. Again, double check your spam filters and junk filters for next month's invite to make sure that you're flagging that as something you do want and training those filters that this is an email that you want to get through every month. Even a few of us, had that get caught up in there. So with the platform change, just takes a little bit of retraining those filters to make sure you're getting that. If you are having troubles with that, shoot us an email and we'll see if we can't get you sorted. So thank you, everyone, and have a great month. We will talk to you again in October.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.